They told me 3 days before Thanksgiving. Not with malice, not even with tension, just that clipped, sugary tone Joanna uses when she's already decided something. We're keeping it small this year, Mom, just the kids, Craig's parents, you understand. And I said I did. I lied. I was standing in the kitchen, hands still damp from rinsing apples, when the call ended. I didn't move right away. The phone screen still glowed, her name disappearing into the quiet. You understand. As if I hadn't set the table for 30 years, roasted breads bigger than my sink, got little felt leaves with the grandkids' names in gold pen. As if I hadn't once driven 4 hours for sleep just to arrive in time to baste the turkey. But I said I understood. Because what else could I say that wouldn't make her sigh? Afterward, I stared at the linen drawer. I still had the orange and brown checkered tablecloth, the one with gravy stains no wash ever got out. I touched it without pulling it out, then quietly shut the drawer again. That night, I microwaved a single-serving turkey dinner from the freezer aisle. I told the cashier it was just for fun, and she gave a polite laugh like she believed me. I tried to believe me too. At home, I lit a single candle and set one place at the end of the table. My mother's silverware. A wine glass. One plate. I blessed the food out loud, and when I said amen, the echo answered. By noon the next day, my phone was still quiet. No messages. Not even one of those group texts with emojis and wish you were here. A Buddha popped up. That was it. Happy Thanksgiving from the algorithm. I tried not to care. I boiled a sweet potato anyway out of habit. Mashed it with butter and a touch of cinnamon. The smell made me close my eyes. That same smell used to fill my whole kitchen, warm and crowded and loud. Back when my table overflowed. When everyone wanted seconds and the floor was sticky with apple cider. I used to complain about the cleanup. I'd give anything to sweep those crumbs now. I sat down with my plate and took a bite. It was fine. Nothing special. But food's not what makes a holiday. People do. And my people were elsewhere. I didn't mean to look. Truly, I didn't. But after dinner, after scraping my plate and pouring a glass of wine I didn't really want, my fingers moved without asking. I opened the app. And there it was. My daughter's post. The photo showed the long mahogany table I bought her when she and Greg bought their first home. That table used to be mine. I had it refinished the year John turned 12. Her initials are still carved in the underside from the time she got grounded and sulked under it for an hour. Now it was dressed in white linen, candles glowing. There were flowers. And faces. So many faces. I zoomed in. Greg's parents, yes. But also his sister, her husband, cousins from out of town. The neighbours. Even the new puppy was in a little bow tie. And at the far end of the table, the chair where I used to sit, sat someone else. A woman I didn't recognise, toasting with cranberry fizz. I stared at that chair for a long time. Not because I was shocked. Not even hurt. Not exactly. It was a different kind of ache. A heavy, settling sort of thing. The kind you don't feel all at once. The kind that starts in your chest and then slips into your bones. I remember the year, it must have been 97, when I drove through a snowstorm just to make it in time. The roads were white-knuckled ice, but the kids met me in the driveway screaming Grandma made it. That year, I burnt the pie, and we all laughed until we cried. Now I was scrolling through photos of that same driveway, now spotless and lit with fairy lights, full of people who never asked where I was. I typed a comment. It looks like fun. I wrote, then I backspaced. Instead, I opened a blank text to myself and typed 4 words. Remember what you saw? I didn't cry. I don't do that much anymore. Not out of pride, just age. Tears have less power when you've spent years swallowing them quietly. At 5 o'clock, there was a knock. I opened the door to find June, my neighbour. She wore a scarf with little acorns on it and held a pie tin with both hands. I figured, she said gently, they left you out. Come over. We've got more food than sense, and somebody needs to tell the turkey story again. The turkey story. I smiled despite myself. That year the oven caught fire because I forgot to take the giblets out, and the whole house smelled like charcoal and sage for a week. The kids thought it was hilarious. I wrapped a fork in a napkin and followed her. June's table was mismatched. Plastic chairs and chipped dishes. A niece spilled gravy on her sleeve, and someone's baby had a runny nose. It wasn't polished. It wasn't curated for social media. It was real. Someone handed me cider. Someone else said, "Mary, tell us about the time the pie exploded." And I did. My voice cracked at first. Then it didn't. At one point, a little girl I didn't know curled up in my lap, sticky-fingered and warm, and I held her like I used to hold Joanna. It was my blood family, but it felt more like family than anything had in a long time. Later that night, I sat by my small lamp with the ceramic base and thought about my own mother's words years ago when I complained that my kids didn't call enough. One day she'd said, "They'll forget what you gave up for them." I'd laughed. I thought she was being dramatic. I understand now. It's not about vengeance. It's about seeing things clearly. The next morning, I opened the app again, found Joanna's profile, and unfollowed her. Not out of anger. Just closure. I stopped needing to be seen by those who were blind. Then I printed the photo. The one with everyone at the table. And I wrote on it in black marker, "Thanks for the reminder, some tables shrink, but others grow." I pinned it to the fridge right beside the hand-drawn place card June's niece had made in crayon. It said, "Mary, guest of honour." It started with something small. Doesn't it always? Last year, not this Thanksgiving, but the one before, Joanna asked if I could just bring rolls. She said it casually over the phone, between talk of the kids' school projects and Greg's new grill. "You always made the best," she added, but there was a pause before she said it. Like she remembered she needed to say something nice. Just the rolls. No sweet potato casserole. No apple pie. Not even my cranberry chutney that Henry once called better than the store stuff. Just the rolls. "I'll make them from scratch," I offered. Another pause. "Oh, no need. We'll just pick some up from that bakery by the freeway, you know, the one with the sourdough everyone likes." I don't know why I felt embarrassed. I shouldn't have. I didn't argue. I said, "That sounds nice," and smiled even though she couldn't see it. That Thanksgiving I brought a jar of my apple butter anyway. Wrapped it in a dish towel with a leaf pattern tied with twine. When I handed it to her at the door, she took it with one hand while balancing her phone in the other. She didn't even look at it. "Thanks, Mom, that's sweet." Then she turned to answer a call. Something about Greg's sister being lost and the parking app not working. I stood in the foyer for a moment holding my coat. It was warm inside, but I kept it on. In the kitchen, I saw the sourdough rolls in a little basket lined with gingham. From the bakery. Untouched. No one mentioned the apple butter. It stayed unopened on the counter, next to the bread knife. The house was full of voices. Greg's parents were there, of course, and his sister with her husband. Two of Joanna's college friends I didn't recognize. I smiled and nodded, the way women my age learn to do when their role has become more decorative than essential. Someone complimented the decor, candles and tiny pumpkins, a garland of fall leaves strewn across the fireplace. I remembered when Joanna used to roll her eyes at my centerpieces. Now she had her own. Better ones, apparently. Dinner was served buffet style. Plates stacked neatly, silverware wrapped in cloth napkins with golden rings. I reached for a plate and someone bumped me, not unkindly, just too busy to notice. By the time I got to the mashed potatoes, the bowl was nearly empty. I scooped the last bit, careful not to scrape. At the table there were place cards. Not the kind I used to make with construction paper and the kids' help, but printed ones, elegant cursive on cream cardstock. There wasn't one for me. I sat at the end, near the window. No one asked me to move. No one said I shouldn't sit there. But no one said I should either. It wasn't cruel. That's what made it worse. It was seamless. Natural. As if this was always how it had been. Halfway through dinner, someone passed me the gravy boat, the white ceramic one with a chip and the handle. Mine. I gave it to Joanna when she moved into this house. She'd once said it was outdated. But here it was, filled with thick brown gravy, steaming. I held it in both hands, suddenly afraid I might drop it. Careful, Mom, Joanna said, lightly. That one doesn't match the new set. It was a joke. Everyone laughed. I did too. But I held the boat a moment longer before setting it down. Later, after dessert pumpkin pie from a store box, not that anyone minded, I stood by the sink, rinsing my plate. Joanna passed behind me and said, "Oh, just leave it, Mom, we've got it." But her voice was tight, like I was in the way. So I left it. My plate. My fork. My presents. I found my coat by the front door and slipped it on without a word. No one noticed. Or maybe they did and assumed I was just stepping out for air. I sat in the car for a while before driving home. The engine ticked quietly. The windshield fogged at the edges. A jar of apple butter sat unopened in the passenger seat. I hadn't remembered to take it inside. Back home, I placed it on the kitchen shelf. Lined it up next to the peach preserves from July, the fig jam from last fall. Little jars of care waiting for hands that didn't reach anymore. I made tea. The house was too quiet. I turned on the radio, soft jazz, a saxophone barely breathing. And that was the first time I truly felt it. Not rejection. Not yet. But absence. Not loud, not cruel. Just empty. Like a room where the furniture has been rearranged and you're the only one who remembers where the sofa used to be. I started setting fewer places at the table on before anyone told me to. It was small at first, skipping the salad forks, using paper napkins instead of linen. Just little things. Adjustments. Accommodations, I told myself. No need to fuss when it's just me. Breakfast became coffee and half a slice of toast. I used to make a full plate eggs, fruit, a little yogurt if I remembered. But now I left the eggs in their carton more often than not. Too much effort for one. Too many dishes. I stopped putting sugar in my coffee. I told myself it was for my health, but the truth was simpler. No one else drank it sweet anymore. I'd gotten used to the bitter. I still cooked sometimes. Out of habit, not hunger. A pot of stew that sat in the fridge for days, portioned into smaller and smaller bowls. A meatloaf that used to be for crowd now pressed into one loaf pan and sliced thin, like it needed to stretch. And always too much soup. Soup was forgiving. You could make it last. Freeze it. Water it down the next day. I had a drawer full of containers, each labelled with dates and taped corners. Lentil, octave, chicken rice, Sep 19. I rarely went back to them. I just liked knowing they were there. On Sundays, I used to call the kids before lunch. Now I waited just in case they called first. They rarely did. So by noon, I'd take a walk, and not for exercise, not really. Just to feel air on my skin, to remember the world had texture. I passed houses with wind chimes and plastic pumpkins on the porch. I looked in windows without staring. Sometimes I saw families' heads bent close over puzzles or TV trays with laughter. I always kept walking. My mail was mostly flyers now. Coupons for oil changes. Menus from pizza places I never ordered from. Sometimes there was a card from Margaret, my old neighbour from church. Her handwriting had started to wobble, but she always signed her notes with "Keep warm, dear, you matter." I pinned them in the fridge with the same magnet that used to hold my grandson's drawings. The drawings had faded years ago. So had the magnets. But I kept them. One Tuesday, I realised I hadn't spoken out loud all day. Not a word. I said hello into the empty living room just to hear it bounce back. That night, I dusted the framed photos in the hallway. Weddings, baptisms, first birthdays. Joanna's smile, frozen at 29. Bragg's proud arm around her. The grandkids when they were still small and full of sticky fingers and noisy joy. I used to update the frames. Now I didn't know if I should. The new photos were online, buried beneath hashtags and filters. I wasn't tight anymore. I didn't ask to be. I had become a background character in their lives, a quiet figure in the corner of old photos, useful only in memory. Even my voice seemed to carry less weight these days. I'd offer to bring a dish and get told, "That's okay, Mom, we've got it covered." I'd ask about a school concert and be told, "Oh, it was last week, we didn't think it was a big deal." Once, I mentioned a recipe I used to make the one with roasted squash and honeyed pecans, and Joanna said, "Oh, that one was so heavy. We try not to do those kinds of meals anymore." As if memory had a calorie count. So I stopped offering. I learned to keep my stories short. To nod instead of add. To sit politely while they talked about things I didn't understand: digital planners, hybrid work weeks, boutique fitness. They weren't unkind. Just busy. Efficient. Grateful in that distracted way modern life teaches people to be all text bubbles and thumbs up emojis. I tried texting back once. Sent a photo of a pie I'd made, caption, "Still got it." Joanna replied 3 hours later, "Yum." That was all. Young. The pie sat untouched on the counter. I wrapped half of it for the freezer and ate the rest one slice at a time, each bite slower than the last. Even my birthday had gone quiet. Not forgotten, no, a group text came in. 8 names, 1 message. Happy birthday, Mom, hope you're having a great day. I stared at it for a while, then replied with a smiley face. Nothing more. I used to make a roast on my birthday. Now I heated soup. Tomato with saltines. The napkin I used was paper, printed with little leaves. Left over from a fall luncheon 3 years ago. I used to host those, invite the neighbours, serve cider, light candles. Now the candles sat unlit. The cider stayed in the pantry. The house got quieter. Not just in sound, but in presence. I used to move from room to room with purpose. Now I found myself stopping in doorways, forgetting why I'd gone there. I started writing lists. Grocery staples I barely needed. Notes like a cold dentist, even when no appointment was due. Sundays the pen felt like company. I wrote my name in cursive on old envelopes, just to see it. Just to remember it was mine. Mary. Once a name called across crowded kitchens. Now just ink. Still, I kept the traditions alive, even if only for myself. I bought a small pumpkin and placed it on the porch. I set out the wreath with the fabric leaves, though the colour had faded. And I lit one candle on the table every night. Just one. Just long enough for the room to feel warm. Because that's what I've always done, created warmth, held space. Even when no one shows up to sit in it. Before the silence, before the group texts and the careful exclusions, there was a time when my table was the centre of everything. It wasn't grand. It wobbled a little if you leaned too hard on the left side, and one of the chairs had a squeak no amount of oil ever fixed. But it was Ira's. I remember one Thanksgiving in maybe 91, maybe 92, when the roads were half iced and the power had gone out the night before. I lit every candle I could find and draped quilts over the windows to keep the draught out. The oven took twice as long to heat, but the turkey still roasted a stubborn, glorious thing that smelled like home. Joanna was still in college then, fresh-faced and full of opinions. She arrived with a backpack and a bag of laundry and immediately started setting the table like she'd never left. She placed the forks on the wrong side. I didn't correct her. Henry, her younger brother, was in charge of drinks. He mixed sparkling cider with ginger ale and spilled half of it on the floor. It's tradition, he grinned, mopping it with one of my good towels. I laughed. Real belly-deep laughter. The kind that surprises you. That year, I made everything from scratch: a sweet potato casserole with pecans, green beans with shallots, 3 kinds of pie because Joanna said pumpkin was too predictable. I even made bread. Real bread, not the frozen rolls I use now. We crammed around the table, elbows bumping, plates overfilled. Someone's knee was always hitting the leg underneath. The dog barked. The radio played old jazz, just soft enough to blend into the background. When we sat down, Henry tapped his glass and said, "Speech, Mom." I waved him off, but they insisted. So I stood still wearing my apron, flour smudged in the front, and I said, "I know it's not perfect." "No one asked for perfect," Joan said, mouthful of stuffing. "But it's warm," I continued. "And it's real, and every single one of you is exactly where I hoped you'd be." Henry raised his glass. "To Mom the glue, the chef, the heart." Joanna added, "And the reason we have leftovers for a week." They all laughed. Even me. That night, after everyone had fallen into food comas and the kitchen looked like a war zone of pythons and gravy boats, I stood alone in the doorway, watching them, Joanna curled up with a blanket, Henry half asleep on the couch, the dog snoring beneath the coffee table. And I remember thinking, this is it. This is what all the sacrifice was for. The sleepless nights, the coupons clipped, the meals stretched, the holidays where I smiled even when I was exhausted, it was all for this. For them. For the noise and the mess and the aching joy of being the centre that held everything together. Now my kitchen smells like disinfectant and lavender soap. My fridge holds 1 half-eaten casserole and a shelf of condiments no one uses. The table is set for one, with a candle that flickers too bright in a too quiet room. And when I scroll through photos are not mine, but theirs, I see them smiling at tables that aren't mine. Dishes I didn't cook. Candles I didn't light. I'm not angry. I want that to be clear. It's not rage. It's not betrayal. It's absence. Pure and simple. Like a book taken off a shelf and never missed. But I remember. I remember Joanna at 13 helping me pipe whipped cream onto the pie with such concentration her tongue stuck out. I remember Henry's ridiculous Thanksgiving songs, made up on the spot and always ending in a rhyme with a turkey. I remember the year the turkey caught fire, yes, caught fire because I forgot to remove the packet of giblets and the oven smoked like a chimney. They teased me about it for years. They used to see me. Now I'm the afterthought. The maybe. The conditional clause in their plans. Maybe if there's room. Maybe next time. Maybe when things calm down. But I remember when I wasn't the maybe. I was the reason. There's a photo tucked into a drawer now from that year the power went out. Henny snapped it without me knowing. I'm in the kitchen, stirring gravy on the stovetop, face lit by candlelight. There's steam rising from the pot, and I'm smiling, just a little. The caption he wrote on the back reads, "Mom, making magic with what she's got." I think that's what stings the most. I didn't need applause. I never asked for credit. I just wanted to be part of it. To be remembered the way I remember them, messy and loud and deeply, unapologetically mine. Now, even the memories feel like someone else's house I'm walking through. I light the candle anyway. I set the plate. I bless the food. Because somewhere in that small, flickering ritual is a version of me that still believes the table matters. Even if no one shows up. The morning before Thanksgiving, I ironed a tablecloth. Not the big one and not the orange and gold with the embroidered leaves that I used to bring out when we had 12, sometimes 14 at the table. Just the smaller one. Cream cotton with a faint floral trim. Enough for 2. Maybe 3. I told myself I just wanted the table to look nice. Just in case. Just for me. But I sat 2 places. One chair beside mine. A second wine glass. A second cloth napkin. Maybe I said aloud, not meaning to. Maybe Joanna would remember. Maybe the plans had changed. Maybe she'd text in the morning and say, "Actually, why don't you come by for dessert?" Maybe someone would knock on the door holding pie and wearing a sheepish smile. Hope is quiet like that. It doesn't announce itself. It just hovers soft and unreasonable. I didn't cook a full meal. I told myself I wasn't that foolish. But I did thaw a turkey thigh, brushed it with butter and sage. I peeled 1 sweet potato, roasted it with cinnamon and a pinch of brown sugar. Enough for 1. But I set out 2 forks. By noon, the oven was warm and the house smelled like something familiar, not quite like the feast of old, but close enough to touch a part of me I'd nearly forgotten. I checked my phone around 12:30. Nothing. But that was strange. People get busy. They cook, they forget. Maybe she'd call later, once everything was on the table. I took out the little cranberry dish anyway. The one shaped like a leaf. I spooned in the jelly I'd bought last week, just in case. I smoothed the top with a butter knife the way I used to when Henry insisted it looked too weird otherwise. By 3 o'clock, I was watching the clock more than I was watching the stove. I opened the linen drawer and found the place cards, the old ones. Construction paper leaves with names written in gold marker. Most of the names had faded. I touched one that said Joey, crooked and smudged. He must have been 7 that year. I remember him helping me cut the leaves, tongue poking out in concentration, fingers stained with glue. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Then tucked it back in the drawer. At 4, I heard footsteps outside, quick, purposeful. My heart jolted. I moved to the window, breath held, pulse fast. It was the mailman. He slipped an envelope into the box and walked on. I stood at the window a few moments longer, not because I still believed, but because I wanted to stretch the maybe as far as it would go. I retrieved the mail. A catalogue. A flyer. A grocery store coupon. Nothing else. Back inside the table waited. My little dinner sat on a warming tray. Still, I didn't give up entirely. Not yet. I sat with the plate in front of me, but didn't touch the fork. I refreshed my messages. Once. Twice. At 5:17 p.m, my phone lit up. My breath caught. It was an ad. Winter boots half off. That was when the last thread of maybe slipped through my fingers. I looked at the second place setting and touched. The napkin folded perfectly. The wine glass still catching the fading light from the window. The second fork resting at an angle that no one would ever use. I could have gotten angry, I suppose. Some people would. but it was anger that settled in my chest. It was stillness. Heavy, resigned, and vast. I stood slowly. Picked up the second plate, still empty. Placed it back in the cabinet. Folded the napkin. Poured the wine back into the bottle. Not out of bitterness, just habit. The table was too wide again. Even with just 2 chairs, it felt like a stage after the actors have gone quiet, echoing, too clean. I ate in silence. The turkey was slightly dry. The sweet potatoes too soft. But I ate every bite. Not because it tasted good, but because I had cooked it. And that meant something. If only to me. After dinner, I didn't scroll social media. Not yet. I wasn't ready for what I might find there. Instead, I washed the dishes with the radio playing softly at a jazz station, slow and scratchy, like music from another room in another house. I dried the leaf-shaped dish and set it gently on the shelf. Then I turned off the kitchen light. The glow from the living room was warm, but distant. I sat in my chair and stared at the candle I'd lit earlier, just one. Its flame had shrunk to a flicker, small but steady. I thought about calling Joanna. Just to say hi. Just to ask how it went. Just to pretend I wasn't checking to see who had been there. But I didn't. I'd already told myself the truth once today. I wasn't going to ask someone else to lie to me now. Instead, I picked up my book. Read the same paragraph 3 times without absorbing it. And when the candle finally went out, I let the darkness stay. Not as punishment. As understanding. Some silences don't need to be filled. Some hopes don't need to be chased. And some dinners, however small, however quiet, still count. Because I showed up. Even if no one else did. It's strange how a silence can be so loud. That night, after the candle went out and the house settled into its usual hush, refrigerator humming, wind tapping lightly at the window, I sat in my chair and felt something shift. Not break. Breaking would be easier. Breaking makes a noise. It draws attention. This was quieter. Like something finally went still after too many years of movement. I didn't even realize I'd opened the app until my thumb was already scrolling. It was habit by then, this pointless little hope that maybe someone had thought of me. That maybe I'd missed a text, a photo, a second chance. But I hadn't. Joanna's post was the first to appear. The algorithm knew what mattered. Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it just knew how to wound. There they were. The table. My table. Not literally, she'd long since replaced the one I gave her. But I knew that centerpiece. The gold-brimmed dishes, she said, were too formal when I gave them. The napkins with stitched corners, folded into perfect triangles. One of the kids must have done that. Or maybe not. Maybe they bought them that way. The caption read, "Grateful for this chaos, these faces, this feast." And below it, photo after photo. Joanna standing behind the turkey with that effortless smile she's perfected. Greg carving the meat like he'd been doing it for years. The kids are older now, thinner and more styled, holding plates and laughing. There were guests I didn't recognize. Some I did. Cousins from Greg's side. A neighbour from across the street. Even the woman who walks their dog when they are out of town. Everyone. Everyone but me. I zoomed in on the far end of the table. There was a chair in my chair, the one I always took when I brought the pies and lit the first candle. It wasn't empty. A woman amid Minas Fortis, I guess, sat there, leaning him with a glass of wine in one hand, the other gesturing mid-story. Comfortable. At ease. Like she belonged. And maybe she did. Because I clearly didn't. I stared at that photo longer than I should have. Not because I was looking for myself, I already knew I wasn't there, but because I kept waiting to feel something sharper. Anger. Rage. Jealousy. But it wasn't any of those. It was fatigue. A deep, aching weariness I couldn't quite name. I looked around the room. My chair. My side table. My lamp. My glass of the lipstick ring from dinner. Everything exactly as I left it. Everything unchanged. Except me. I used to be someone they needed. Someone they called. Someone who packed pies into the back seat and drove through storms just to make it in time for Grace. Now I was a ghost in their photo albums. A blurry figure in the corner of a story they were rewriting without me. I closed the app. Slowly. Like it weighed more than it should. I rested the phone in my lap and stared at my hands. They looked old tonight, thinner than I remembered, the veins more prominent. My knuckles worn like soft stones, rounded from years of work. These were the hands that stitched Joanna's Halloween costumes. That changed Henry's sheets after he got sick at 2 in the morning. That kneaded dough, wiped tears, flipped pancakes, scrubbed baseboards, zipped dresses. These were the hands that held my family together. And now they shook when I reached for my teacup. Not from illness. Not from fear. From emptiness. I rose to put the cup in the sink, but halfway there I stopped. I didn't want to wash it. Not out of spite. Just because I needed to leave something undone. Something real. Something that said I was here. I placed the cup on the counter and turned off the kitchen light. The house sighed around me, old walls, familiar creaks, the thump of the heater kicking in. It all felt so normal. But inside me, something was not. I went to the bedroom, slipped off my sweater, folded it over the chair like I always did, sat on the edge of the bed. And there it was. The sound of nothing. No calls. No footsteps. No voices from down the hall. Just the knowing. That no one was coming. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. That the doorbell would stay silent. That my phone would glow with spam and weather alerts, but not a single sincere "how are you?" That I had spent a lifetime holding space, and now there was no one left to fill it. I lay back on the quilt of the one I made the year after Thomas died, pieced together from old curtains and flannel shirts. It was supposed to be a project, something to keep my hands busy. It became the thing I reached for when the nights got too quiet. I stared at the ceiling, and I thought maybe I gave too much. Not money, though there was that. Not food, though there was always plenty. But space, grace, forgiveness. Maybe I let them take more than they knew. Maybe I was so afraid of being left out that I kept showing up even after they stopped inviting me. Maybe I made it easy for them to forget me. Too easy. I closed my eyes. Not to sleep. Just to rest from being awake. From being alert. From being the one who remembers. Because that's what I've become, the keeper of memories no one asks about. The last witness to a love that's faded not from betrayal, but from neglect. And tonight, for the first time, I didn't want to remind them. The morning after Thanksgiving, the world outside my window looked the same. Grey light, brittle air. The last leaves clinging to the maple out front. A square dotted along the fence line like it had somewhere important to be. Inside it was quiet, but not the aching kind of quiet that had filled the house the night before. This was different. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea. I hadn't added sugar again. Not out of habit this time, out of clarity. My phone sat beside me, face down. I hadn't turned it over. Didn't need to. No one had called. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't check. Instead, I reached for a pen. There was a notepad on the counter, the one I usually used for grocery lists or doctor's appointments. But today, I didn't write milk or ointment. I wrote what I gave, and below it in small, steady print, 31 Thanksgiving turkeys, Joanna's college deposit, Henry's wedding rehearsal dinner, 200 rides to piano lessons, a garage full of holiday decorations, 2 knees stiff from standing too long. Then on the next page I wrote what I got, and I stared at the page for a while, not because I didn't know what to write, but because the first words that came were too honest. Excuses. Postponements. We'll let you know. Photos I wasn't in. I closed the notepad gently. There was no bitterness in that act. No flurry of anger. Just a pause. Like finally exhaling after holding my breath for too many years. I looked around the kitchen. The same tea towel hung from the oven handle. The same pie plate empty now sat in the drying rack. The same little magnet held a calendar on the fridge. Everything had stayed the same. And that was the problem. I made this place into a monument for a life that had moved on without me. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped waiting for them to notice. It wasn't a dramatic realization. It didn't crash into me like a wave. It crept in like morning light through blinds, soft and gradual, impossible to ignore once it settled. The truth was simple. I couldn't keep trying to earn what should have been given freely. Love. Inclusion. A seat at the table. I didn't need to be celebrated, but I did need to be seen, and I hadn't been. Not for a long time. I'd become convenient when useful, invisible when inconvenient, always there until I wasn't. And yesterday proved it. They had filled the table. Filled it. With cousins and neighbours and acquaintances. Not because they forgot, but because they chose. That knowledge didn't sting the way it used to. It settled. Because I chose to. Every time I said yes. Every time I let a slight pass without acknowledgement. Every time I convinced myself that next time would be different. Next time. I smiled faintly. There comes a point in every woman's life when next time becomes a lie you stop telling yourself. And this morning, with the last of the turkey sealed in foil and the house washed clean of artificial gratitude, I decided I was done waiting for someone else to notice my worth. I wasn't sure what that meant yet. Not fully. But something had shifted. I would not chase. I would not remind. I would not press my face to a window hoping to be seen through the glass. Instead, I would open the door and walk into my own story. Theirs could go on, curated and photographed and shared with little captions and perfect light. Mine would be quieter, maybe. But it would be mine. And maybe, just maybe, I would finally learn what it felt like to be the honoured guest in my own life. The grocery list still sat on the counter. Half written from days before. Butter or foil, cinnamon, and in smaller letters, maybe dessert. I picked it up, folded it neatly, and dropped it into the recycling bin. Then I reached for my coat. Not the old grey one I wore for walks. The wool one. Navy with the wide lapels and velvet-lined pockets. I'd bought it on clearance a decade ago and worn it twice. Once to a wedding. Once to Henry's retirement dinner. It still smelled faintly of perfume. I buttoned it slowly, smoothing the fabric over my chest like armour. Then I opened the hall closet. Tucked behind the vacuum, under an old fleece blanket, was the suitcase, the navy one with worn wheels and a fraying tag that still read Langford in faded ink. I hadn't used it in years. Not since the cruise Thomas and I took for our 40th anniversary. That was before the grandchildren, before Greg, before holidays started being complicated. I pulled it out. Brushed the dust from the zipper. I snapped the handle and clicked it into place. And then, carefully and not with haste, not with a grand sense of escape, I began to pack. 2 sweaters. The cream one with the embroidered collar and the forest green that matched my eyes when I still wore mascara. Slacks. Shoes comfortable enough for walking. My book. The one with the pressed flower still marking chapter 13. A scarf. And my mother's silver hairbrush with the handle worn smooth. I didn't need much. I wasn't going far. But I was going. To a little inn I'd once bookmarked online half an hour up the court. Run by a retired teacher and her partner. They served cider by the fire and homemade bread in the morning. No children. No televisions in the rooms. Just close quiet and ocean air. I had called them that morning. Left a message. The woman in June, her name was called back within the hour. "We've got 1 room left," she said. "It's the one with the window that faces the sea, bit drafty, but cosy." "I don't mind drafty," I told her. "Then it's yours, just give us a name," I said Mary before she finished the sentence. And that was that. I scribbled a note for myself and left it on the kitchen table. Back Sunday. Everything's fine. I just needed air. I didn't tell Joanna. I didn't text the kids. Not because I wanted to punish them. That chapter had closed. But because this was mine. A choice without permission. A step without witness. I rolled the suitcase out to the porch, locked the door behind me, and stood for a moment on the steps. The wind had picked up. It pulled gently at my coat, teased the edges of my scarf. I drew a deep breath in through the nose, the way the therapist had taught me after Tom's passed. Hold for 3 counts. Release. The air tasted different. Brighter. And for a moment I wasn't tired. Not young. Not fixed. Just centered. I didn't look back as I walked to the car. The engine started on the first try, and I laughed a short, surprised sound that sounded like someone I used to be. The drive was quiet. The trees were bare, their branches like ink on a watercolour sky. The radio played something soft and slow. I didn't sing along. I just listened. And when I pulled into the gravel lot and saw the inn, all gingerbread trim and curling smoke from the chimney, I didn't second guess. She'd met me at the door. She had grey curls and warm eyes, and her sweater had a loose thread she didn't bother hiding. "You must be married," she said. "I must," I replied. She smiled. "No rush on paperwork," she said, stepping aside. "Come warm up first." Inside, the fire was lit. The walls were lined with books. A tea tray waited on a low table. "You're our only guest tonight," she added. "So pick whatever chair feels right." I chose one by the window. And as I sat, the tea in hand, the sea just visible through the glass, my suitcase still unopened, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness. Not yet. But agency. This was mine. This moment. This space. No one had made room for me. So I'd made it myself. And that in its quiet way was enough. When I returned home Sunday evening, the porch light had turned itself on, just as they always did. Martian sensor. Predictable. Like so much of the life I'd built around everyone else's routines. The house was just as I'd left it. Still. I rolled the suitcase inside and stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the air settle around me. It smelled faintly of lavender and something fainter underneath, the kind of clean that comes not from tidying, but from absence. No messages on the machine. No missed calls. One email to sale on throw pillows. That was all. I unpacked slowly, folding the clothes with deliberate care. I placed the silver hairbrush back on the dresser. Smoothed the quilt. Refilled the tea tin. There was no rush. I was waiting anymore. Later that night, I sat in the living room with a cup of peppermint tea and lit a single candle. Not the one I used at Thanksgiving. A new one. One I'd picked up at the inn, soy wax, pine and clove. It burned clean, steady. No memory attached. I looked around the room. There were still photos on the walls. A row of them down the hallway, Joanna in her cap and gown, Henry with his newborn daughter, the family reunion we had at 8 when Thomas still had his full laugh. I rose and walked to them one by one. I didn't take them down. Not yet. I simply looked. And then I came to the photo. The one Joanna had posted. The one I'd printed and left in the drawer. The Thanksgiving I wasn't invited to. The table I didn't set. The chair someone else filled. I placed it on the kitchen counter beside the fridge magnet that held the grocery receipt from last month. And I wrote a note on the back. Not angry. Not bitter. Just this. Thanks for the reminder. Some tables shrink, but others grow. Then I pinned it to the fridge next to the place cartoons niece had made during that messy, laughter-filled evening by the fire. Merry guest of honour. I stepped back. Looked at the pairing. One a symbol of exclusion. The other of belonging. And there, in the stillness of my own kitchen, I felt the scale tip. Not toward resentment, but resolution. I didn't need to be invited where I was only remembered as an afterthought. I didn't need to sit at tables where my absence made things easier. I wasn't going to shrink anymore to fit their comfort. I poured the rest of my tea into the sink. And then, without drama, I opened my phone. No hesitation this time. I navigated to Drenna's profile, the page filled with curated joy, seasonal decorations, posts, smiles, and quietly pressed and follow. I didn't block. I didn't announce. I didn't flinch. Just to let it go. Not out of punishment. Out of peace. She could live her life. They all could. I'd stopped trying to be stitched into a story that no longer had room for my voice. The next morning I woke early. I made coffee. Real coffee, not instant. With cream. With sugar. Because I like it that way. I wrote a postcard to June. Thank you for the pie. And the place. And the remembering. I walked it to the mailbox myself. The cold air stung my cheeks, but I didn't rush back inside. And when I returned, I went to the table. Wiped it clean. Took out 2 more candles. Set them in the centre. And I whispered, not as a wish, but a promise. Next year, I'll set a bigger table for those who made room for me. It's been 3 weeks since Thanksgiving. The leaves have all gone now. The tree out front stands bare, its limbs reaching skyward like it's remembering something. Something it lost, or maybe something it's preparing to become again. Inside, the house hums quietly. Not empty, just full of stillness. A stillness I no longer fear. I've begun a new routine. Morning tea with the radio playing low. A walk around the block, no matter the weather. Writing small notes to myself, to June, sometimes to no one at all. A day is yours, use it like breath. Don't wait to be chosen. Warmth isn't what you're given. It's what you build. I pinned them on the fridge between the old magnets and the hand-drawn place card. My name still there, Mary Guest of Honour. I haven't spoken to Joanna since that day. She hasn't called and I haven't reached out. Not out of pride. Just understanding. Some people love in proximity. When they're close, when they need you, when you're easy to reach. Others disappear as they grow. And sometimes they don't notice what they've left behind until they need it again. I'm not waiting for that day anymore. I'm not sitting by the phone or checking the mailbox with a flicker of hope I pretend not to have. Instead, I've begun to fill the space they left with things that root me. I joined a little community writing group. There's 4 of us, all older, all with stories no one asks about anymore. We meet on Thursdays at the library and share tea, laughter, and pieces of ourselves. No one interrupts. No one corrects our memories. We listen. I've started baking again, and not for holidays, not for approval. Just for the joy of it. Cranberry scones. A loaf of banana bread I wrapped in a towel and left on June's porch with a note that said, for no reason at all and every reason too. I've even taken to setting the table on Sundays not with a good silver, but with intention. 1 plate, 1 cup, 1 candle. Not as a placeholder, but as a practice. A way to say I am here. I matter. I welcome myself. There's power in that. A steadiness I didn't know I'd been missing. The house doesn't feel too big anymore. It feels right-sized. Like it's growing with me, not waiting for someone else to fill it. I dust the photos now without sadness. They're memories, not evidence. They remind me of what was, yes, but also of how much I gave. How well I lived. And that is valued, even if it's not mirrored back the way I once longed for. I didn't stop being with you just because they stopped saying thank you. That truth has reshaped everything. There are still days when the quiet feels heavier than I'd like. When I wonder if they remember the scent of my kitchen or the way I folded napkins into little fans. But those moments pass more quickly now, because I've made new places to be seen. And more than that, I've made peace with not being seen by those who no longer look. That, I think, is a quiet triumph. Not in making them change. Not in forcing a reckoning. But in releasing the need to be invited into a room where your name is forgotten. I have my own table now. Not the kind made of wood and chairs, but of space. Space I hold for myself. For laughter with friends who remember my middle name. For mornings that start with music and not expectation. For kindness given without calculation. And for joy, the quiet kind that doesn't need permission. This year, I wasn't part of their story. But I didn't vanish. I returned to mine. And in that return, I found something better than revenge, louder than confrontation. I found myself. Still here. Still worthy. Still whole.